Shall we continue this story? If you haven't seen part 1, click on the link above. He was no longer just a guard. He had become David's blade in the dark. When the king needed silence instead of spectacle, he sent Benaiah. Whispers of conspiracy, rebel factions in Hebron, mercenaries plotting with Moabites, betrayers within Israel's own ranks. These were not enemies to be met in open fields with banners and horns. No, these were enemies who wore cloaks, passed messages in the night, and drank from David's table while sharpening knives behind his back. And they all learned the same truth. If you threaten the throne, you don't see David. You see Benaiah. He would ride alone. No fanfare, no shield bearers, just a horse, a hood, and a mission. And when he returned, the danger had passed. No trial, no debate, just justice. These were the secret wars of David, and they were won not with songs, but with the sword of a silent warrior. It's why David trusted him more than most, not just for battle, but for discernment. Because a man like Benaiah, shaped in pits and proven in silence, knew how to read hearts even when words failed. There were no parades for these victories, no parables, no written laws, only decisions, hard ones, bloody ones. And time and again, Benaiah did what others could not. He obeyed without ego. He executed without hesitation. He protected the prophecy without craving the platform. Because behind every great king, there is a warrior who carries the burden no one else wants. The burden of doing what must be done, even when it cannot be praised. And maybe that's why his name is whispered by heaven, even when it's skipped by men. Because heaven doesn't count how loudly you fought, it remembers how faithfully you served. And in the secret wars, where loyalty cost blood and obedience felt like exile, Benaiah stood tall, unseen, unshaken, unmatched. Every kingdom has its shadows, but not every king has the man to walk in them. David had died, Solomon had ascended, and the crown, still warm, sat on the head of a young king destined to rule with wisdom, but not without war. Enemies remained. Not Philistines this time, but men within the kingdom, ghosts from David's past, still clinging to power. Chief among them, Joab, a seasoned general, a war hero, a man once loyal to David, until ambition poisoned his soul. He had betrayed David, aligned with Adonijah to steal the throne from Solomon. And though Joab had slain many for Israel, his hands were now stained with innocent blood. Abner, Amasa, men he struck down in the name of control. Solomon issued the order, but he didn't send soldiers. He didn't call for captains. He called Benaiah. Because this job needed more than a sword, it needed a conscience strong enough to swing it. Benaiah found Joab clinging to the altar in the tabernacle, fingers wrapped around the horns, hoping the sacred space would save him. But even mercy has limits when justice must rise. Joab looked up, eyes wild, voice desperate. "I will die here." And Benaiah replied with the steadiness of a man who had faced lions and giants, "Then die you shall." He drew his blade, not in rage but in obedience, and in the very place Joab thought he was untouchable, the sword fell. Not out of vengeance, but out of righteousness, the kingdom exhaled. The threat was gone. The line of David, now in Solomon, was secure. And Benaiah walked away, not celebrated, not thanked, but trusted. Then came Shimei, another serpent, once cursed by David, given temporary mercy with a clear condition: do not cross the brook Kidron. But Shimei, in arrogance, did. 3 years later, Solomon summoned Benaiah again. No speeches, no appeals, just the king's word and the warrior's blade. One swing, one silence, one more loose end tied. Benaiah didn't question orders. He didn't tremble before sacred places or powerful names, because he knew when the king speaks, the sword must obey. And so Benaiah, once the lion slayer, once the shadow blade of David, now stood as the arm of Solomon's justice. He was promoted, commander of the entire army of Israel. But titles didn't matter to him. He had always been a soldier of truth, a weapon sharpened by obedience, a man who understood that sometimes peace must be protected by the sword. And when the blade rose in his hand, it rose for the crown, not for himself. Some men are remembered for what they wrote, others for what they did in silence. We sing of David, the harp in his hand, the psalms on his lips, the poetry that turned pain into praise. His words became scripture, his cries became songs, his name eternal. But not every warrior sings. Some men bleed quietly, far from the crowds, doing the will of God with no audience but heaven. Benaiah was one of those men. He wrote no psalms. He played no instruments. His pen was a sword. His stage was the battlefield. And though he stood beside kings, his voice is barely heard in scripture. Why? Because Benaiah wasn't born for applause. He was born for assignment. He never became a king, never claimed a throne, never demanded a crown. But every crown he guarded stayed on the head of the righteous. He outlived Saul's madness, Absalom's rebellion, Adonijah's betrayal, and Joab's ambition. And yet he never sought power, he served it. And perhaps that is what makes him greater than most. In a world where everyone is chasing greatness, Benaiah was content being faithful. No one wrote songs about the lion in the pit. No choir sang of the Egyptian giant. No scroll weeps for the man who guarded David while he slept. But the heavens remember, because it is not only the psalmist who pleases God, it is the man who obeys when no one is looking. The man who kills giants in silence, who stands at the king's door and never lets darkness pass. He was a sword without a song. But oh, what a blade he was! His loyalty wasn't loud, but it was unbreakable. His strength wasn't celebrated, but it was unmatched. And his reward, it wasn't fame, it was trust. David trusted him with his life. Solomon trusted him with the justice of a kingdom. And God trusted him with a legacy that would shape the royal bloodline of Christ. Yes, the Bible may not spend many verses on Benaiah, but every word it does use carries weight. He had done many deeds. He was more honored than the 30, and David set him over his guard. 2 Samuel 23:22-23. That's the reward of the quiet warrior. Not a stage, not a spotlight, but honor. And in the end, that is what echoes in eternity. Some names thunder through history. Others echo in silence, remembered not by the masses, but by heaven. When kings rise and fall, when scrolls are written and battles fade into dust, there remains a class of men who stood in the shadows and held kingdoms together with blood, steel, and silence. Benaiah was one of them. He never built a palace. He never wore a crown. He never sat on a throne, but he protected them all. He was not a prophet, not a priest, not a poet, but he was chosen for something greater than fame. Chosen to be a guardian of destiny, a keeper of the covenant, a blade that cut only when justice demanded it. And when the wars ended, when David lay in the arms of death and Solomon reigned in golden halls of wisdom, Benaiah quietly disappeared from the stage. No grand farewell, no funeral scroll, just silence. A man whose sword had spoken louder than most men's lives simply faded from the records, forgotten maybe by men, but not by God. Because God doesn't measure legends by popularity, he measures them by purpose, and Benaiah had fulfilled his. He had slain the lion, disarmed the giant, defended the anointed, carried out justice, and protected the bloodline that would one day bring forth the Messiah himself. That is not just history, that is eternal significance. And in heaven's hall of warriors, his name still rings. Benaiah, the silent sword, the king's shadow, the man who lived his entire life not to be seen, but to be trusted. So why don't we talk about him more? Because Benaiah never pointed the sword at himself. He always pointed it toward purpose. In today's world, where everyone wants a platform, a spotlight, a stage, his life is a whisper of something greater, that faithfulness still matters. That strength isn't always loud, and that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who never ask to be remembered. So the next time you read about David's mighty men, pause. Look for the name that slips by in a single verse. And remember the warrior whose legacy wasn't written in ink, but in the blood he shed, the kings he protected, and the God he honored. Benaiah may be a forgotten legend on earth, but in heaven he stands tall among the giants. This was the story of the second greatest swordsman in the Bible, and maybe, just maybe, he was the fiercest of them all. Like, share and subscribe if this story moved you. And remember, you don't need a spotlight to make history. You just need a sword and the courage to use it for the right cause.